So this is a poem that was written kind of musing on life and time and what we're like and what the world is like. So it says, "There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace, a time to refrain, a time to search, a time to give up, a time to keep, a time to throw away, a time to tear, a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What does the worker gain from his toil? I have seen the burden God has laid on men. He's made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there's nothing better for men than to be happy and do good while they live, that everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it, nothing taken from it. God does it so that men will revere him. Whatever is has already been, and what will be has been before. And God will call the past to account." So as I said, this passage is taken from that book called Ecclesiastes, which is helpful for us because it's this guy musing on life and the world and what we're like and time and the kind of joys and the sadness and bluntly actually how frustrating it can be at times. And I think it's quite helpful because I think when we talk about kind of new life, young life, people are often interested in the potential, aren't they? They sort of look and they wonder, what will they become? What will they do? What will they see? What will they experience? There's something very interesting about that kind of grand waiting game that begins when someone is born. So what can Roman expect from life? Well, this passage will offer us some insights. The writer begins, "There's a time for everything, a season under heaven for every activity." In verse 2, he indicates that he's going to look at the whole of life, bookended by the beginning and the end, a time to be born and a time to die. And this is the first of, there's 14 pairs, I don't know if you saw in that poem there, opposites which show what life is like. And I think you could probably sum them up by saying life is a mixed bag. There's varied emotions, there's weeping, laughing, there's changing relationships, silence and speech, refraining from embracing and embracing, gathering, scattering, planting, uprooting, war and peace, different things that fill up our time. And now the longer we've lived, probably the more we can appreciate that life is one thing after another, back and forth, things change. Often the world seems to be changing without us and leaving us behind. The way these pairs are kind of set out, it's almost as though one thing cancels out the other. Planting is cancelled out by uprooting, mending by tearing, hate by love, birth by death. Life's a bit of a mixed bag. I think we kind of know that, don't we? It can feel futile at some moments and then full of progress at the next, each in its own time. So actually I think we know that as Roman grows up, he can expect this kind of whirl of change. We kind of know that to be true, don't we, from our own lives. Things change, things progress, things start, things end. So as Roman grows up, there'll be a time to crawl, a time to walk, a time to run, a time to move out, eventually. Life isn't always or isn't often easy, and as much as I might wish to protect Roman from the things that he will face, he'll face many of the same struggles that we all do. Of course, many of the same joys as well. So given that life is a sort of mixed bag and every cloud has a silver lining and every silver lining has a cloud, the writer asked in verse 9, he asks a question. He says, what does the worker gain from all his toil? He's almost saying, well, what's the point? Build a career and then retire and be replaced, or make a friend and then see them move away, or unlearn this old bad habit and then learn some other new good habit. The writer looks at the kind of kaleidoscope of life and he says, well, what should we make of it? What's the value of these fleeting experiences, one after the other, constantly changing, sometimes forward, sometimes backwards? Well, first, in verse 10, he recognises that's the way life's been set up by God. He's made life like this. But having done that, he begins to answer his own question. What does he make? What do we gain from this whirlwind of life? Verse 11, he says, God has made everything beautiful in its time. So in other words, there's real good to be had, real joy out there to experience, real beauty to appreciate, real emotions, deep emotions to feel. Life's more than just a kind of interaction of atoms. Think about any kind of iconic image, Kate holding the baby outside the hospital after it's been born, or the clouds of smoke billowing up from the Twin Towers, the England team holding aloft the World Cup, or the child washed up on a beach. They're just images on the face of it, but we know, don't we, that there's so much more kind of depth and reality to them. It's sort of significance, and it's often something we can't quite put words to or grasp or sort of get our heads around. But we're sure it's there, we know it's there. The writer is saying there's something more, there's something deeper beyond the kind of science and chemistry that could be used to describe our lives. Our experience of beauty or wonder or transcendence. And life can be wonderful, and it often is, and we feel it's got this great significance. What do we gain, the writer asks? Well, we gain these experiences of something deeper, these moments of joy, these times of happiness together with family, the taste of good food, or all the good things that we enjoy in life. But we did see there, didn't we? Everything is beautiful in its time. The beauty and wonder we experience in life rarely lasts long. We come to the end of the meal, our friends have to go away, all sorts of things like that. It has its time and then it's gone. I don't know, this probably will come as a bit of a revelation to some of you, but I've actually competed at international level in sport. Well, when I was at university, I played a sport called ultimate frisbee, which, if you Google it, you will find is actually much cooler and more athletic and skillful than it sounds. So I went to the World Beach Championships, which were in Italy, which was quite amazing, just this endless sandy beach and loads of people throwing frisbees around. It was good anyway. I played for the university team, and we were one of the best teams in the country. And I remember coming back from one particular tournament and just feeling brilliant. We'd really played well. We hadn't had any substitutions the whole weekend, so we'd all played the whole time. And usually you sort of roll on, roll off a bit like basketball. And it just felt so good, that achievement. But actually after a week, the glory had faded. And it was beautiful in its time. And I kind of look back on it now, and it's a fond memory, but it doesn't have the same kind of weight that it did then. And while I may as well reveal another kind of potentially embarrassing hobby, which is I quite like watching professional wrestling on the television. And there was this guy called Kurt Angle who won an Olympic gold medal with a broken neck. I think it was the '96 Olympics, before he became a wrestler. And he was quite young, and he'd kind of achieved what he wanted to in life. And there's various interviews with him, and he was satisfied for a while, but then he kind of began asking, okay, what's next? He'd had this great achievement, but it was beautiful in its time. The satisfaction didn't last. So one option, I guess, as we think about the kind of fleeting nature of these things is, there was a TV ad a few years ago from Vodafone, and it was about a mayfly which only lives for a single day. And so this sort of hypothetical sentient mayfly packs his day full of good things, like playing tennis with a leaf and things like that. But the message was, well, make the most of now. Get everything out of it while it lasts. And certainly on first impression, that's what this writer seems to be saying. Enjoy the beauty as it goes by. That's what he says in in verse 13. Let me read it to you. He says, starting in verse 12, "There's nothing better for men than to be happy and do good while they live, that everyone may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all his toil. This is the gift of God." So actually he says, life is a bit of a mixed bag, but there's real things to enjoy there, so enjoy them. He won't just say that, he goes to look a bit deeper. He says, goes on to say, he says, everything's beautiful in its time, but he also says he has set eternity in the hearts of men. So actually he can't help but look a bit deeper than just these passing, enjoyable, good things. God has put eternity into the hearts of men. He observes daily life, yes, but the writer also observes something about us. That eternity is in our hearts. We look for something deeper, that connection with the joy, the deep emotion, the purpose, the reason. I think that's why we're filled with thoughts about potential when we look at a baby, or a landscape fills us with awe. That's why we want to leave the world in a better state than we found it. Even those who say God doesn't exist still want to leave the world in a better place than it was. Still think people should do good and be happy. And that's because God has put eternity into our hearts. We feel life has meaning, that discovery is worth it, that we want to be part of something bigger than ourselves and do good. And therefore, just as Roman will experience this kind of whirling mix in life, actually he will look out at the world with all its beautiful, mad complexity and sense something bigger, more than just a wheel of good and bad. So given this kind of desire that we have, what the writer says next is quite surprising. At verse 11 he says, "Yet we cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end." So we long for something that we can't quite grasp. It's always slipping through our fingers. We were walking yesterday and we saw that one of our local takeaways is being refurbished, and it had been a very tatty sort of place beforehand. And it said "open as usual," which I was quite surprised, because it looked like a wreck. Well, I suppose it always looked like a wreck inside, but it still looked like a wreck even though refurbished. Anyway, the point, usually when you walk past and they're open and they're cooking, they're pumping out the smell of the Chinese takeaway. And I guess we've all had that experience walking past a restaurant, or there's those kind of sweet shops on the seafront where they make fudge and they put it on the marble slab and make it in the window. And the point is to kind of entice you in, isn't it? It's a foretaste, a scent of something better, a glimpse to kind of draw you in. And I think that's kind of what's going on here, that we've got this desire for something more, something deeper in our hearts, and yet we can never quite grasp it. It's like we're kind of looking in the sweet shop window, or smelling the smell of the food. It's enticing us to something more, but we can't quite go in. There's this contrast between the kind of enticing permanence of eternity, of deeper things, and these kind of flashing changes in our lives. That's the frustration that Roman's going to feel. A desire to stay in the good moments forever, and the reality that time marches on. What then is the writer's advice in this kind of conundrum? Well, it's quite nice advice really. Verse 12, "Be happy, do good, eat, drink, find satisfaction in your work." Things that we all want to do, we all want to enjoy. I guess some will say that Christians kind of lose the taste in life and are very limited and miss out on all sorts of things. But actually we see the Bible here is saying, it's really good, it's really right to enjoy these things. So when we have our food, I've seen some lovely cupcakes, which we're going to have later. When we enjoy those things, it's good to enjoy those things as God has given them to us, because, verse 13, they're the gift of God. God hasn't just given us this sort of passing taste for eternity, he's given us things to enjoy as well on the way, and we should enjoy them. So one of the reasons we've dedicated ourselves today is actually because following Jesus means Roman can be encouraged to enjoy the good things of life, giving thanks to God for what they are. Imagine we finish here and we put out the lunch, and you say, oh, I'm sorry, I just can't eat any of it because I love you. It just wouldn't make sense. If someone gives you a gift, enjoying it and saying thank you is the right response, not kind of ignoring it or misusing it. So we want Roman to be able to enjoy the life, the gift of God that it is. Enjoy it, knowing it in the greatest possible ways. God intended it to be enjoyed. But there's something more here that the writer has to say. Actually, it's quite a challenging thing to hear. Verse 14 talks about, let me read it for you. It says, I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it, nothing taken from it. God does it so that men will revere him, or kind of look up to him, or look to him. Actually, it's quite challenging because it says that this kind of frustration of we've got this peak into deeper things, but they pass. We kind of know something's there, but we can't grab hold of it. That situation has been set up by God. He's made the world that way. He's kind of set it up a bit like that sweet shop window. And he's done it, verse 14, so that people will revere him or look to him. So we could say that actually God has set up the world to show that we need him, to help us see we need to depend on him. I don't know if you may have heard on the radio recently, after all the snow thawed, we had lots of snow thawed, and water mains and stuff burst, or whatever it was that stopped it working properly. And they had this guy on the radio, and he was talking about how he'd been without water for a week, or however long it had been. And he said, basically he said, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. How the basic things of life, going to the toilet and brushing his teeth and having a drink of water. If you've got no fresh water, he couldn't do it. That kind of situation opened his eyes to how dependent he was on the water company working effectively. And it's kind of the same thing there, that the way that life is meant to kind of nudge us to see that we need to come to God. He's stable and eternal. Everything he does endures forever, whereas we are bound by time. He's able to kind of scratch that itch of eternity that we have in our hearts. In verse 15 says he's able to call back the past to account. Each generation may come and go, but God does not forget them. He's able to call them back. And there's a part in the Gospels, which is the story of Jesus' life, where many people turn away from him because they've heard this difficult teaching. And Jesus turns to his closest followers and he says, well, do you want to leave as well? And they respond by saying, well, to who else shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. When Jesus walked on the earth, he showed that he could put an end to this kind of passing nature of beauty that we see. He came from God to throw open those doors to eternity, to invite us in. He died to make it possible. And when he rose again, his body was transformed. It wasn't subject to kind of the vagaries of changing time. He spoke about taking his followers to his Father's house, a new creation where there wouldn't just be this kind of good and then bad and neutral and on and on and on, but actually not this kind of roller coaster, but only an ever ascending summit. The only change would be that things would get better and better. All those deeper, greater things we long for, fulfilled, all the stresses and strains and toil removed. So I guess in thinking about and trying to express why it is that we've dedicated ourselves to bring Roman up as we've done, I can't put it more simply than Jesus' closest friends did when they said, to whom else can we go? For you have the words of eternal life. Life only fits, it's only at its best when we have Jesus at the centre. He holds those words of eternal life. And we don't want Hunter or Roman to miss out on that. We don't want anyone that we know to. And that's why we've made this commitment today. I guess most of us probably will identify a little bit with what's been said about the kind of nature of life. So I do want to kind of throw that challenge out slightly and say, well, where will we turn in this world that is changing, where we have these glimpses of stuff that we can't quite grasp?